right. Who wants to handle the first one? What is our main point?
Can I try?
Of course.
That there's this guy named this musician named Schoenberg who he really impacted and changed like an entire genre of music, and the author compares him to be on the level of Beethoven even. And he did this by, like altering different types of techniques and things like that.
Who agrees with her?
Cora? Yeah, because I just put a little bit more simpler, but it pretty much exactly what, is it Evie?
Ebby, yeah.
I'm going to get this, I promise.
It's okay.
So I just said proof Schoenberg music is just as good as Beethoven, but I was on that same path.
I love it. You were on the right path, Ebby. Ebby, right? Ebby. Ebby. Now I'm doing the opposite. Ebby. I'm gonna write it down. I love how Cora simplified it. Where at the end of the day, which I think you were there, but you added additional detail. Whereas, like, what was the point? That this musician is as good as Beethoven.
Okay.
Or showing you why. Would you agree with that or disagree?
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Who wants to handle tone? What was the author's tone?
I can talk about it.
Yeah, Jasmine.
We've discussed, I believe he doesn't completely understand or agree with Schoenberg music, but he respects it. What do you think?
What does our class think? Do we agree, disagree?
I think it's neutral.
I thought it was neutral positive.
Yeah.
I thought he really liked him because he's were like awe-inspiring and things like that. So I thought it was like enthusiastic.
The last paragraph definitely shows strong author tone, but then like for that like sounds pretty neutral. So I don't know, like I'm between like neutral.
Yeah, like neutral, but he respects it because of
I like let's say you said neutral positive or neutral respect. I would say it leans positive, but it's not
negative.
He's not, and like I think maybe
3.5 stars.
3.5. No, I love that. Where I'm coming in is Heavy is he's not as biased. Like it's not like this is his best friend that he's writing about, and like we all need to agree with this. I think he's like we have more of a not biased perspective analyzing it.
To me, how I looked at it was when the author first introduced both Beethoven and Schoenberg, or the assumption that we kind of know who they were. It's like, okay, Beethoven's well known. We all know who he is. And it took years for him to become so popular. And here comes this new guy named Schoenberg coming into the picture. Now the author slowly introducing him into the passage. And then from there, going into the different areas of what he's done from his technique and then how he's evolved, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more of an introduction at first because you can't compare him to the great of Beethoven initially from what I read from the first from the first paragraph. And then slowly he starts concentrating more on Schoenberg.
I love that. That's awesome, Derek. Shocker. I mean, like, Derek, you have like these deep thoughts that are awesome. Your reasoning is so great. It's just like, I bet you probably understand more than you get questions right. Which is not like, that's the point of the test, right? Getting questions right.
Yeah.
Derek just needs to have more confidence in himself because he's pretty damn smart.
Yeah, no, clearly. So
we're here to boost Derek's ego.
That's half the test. I'm writing I'll get to that in a second, never mind. Which of the following most accurately expresses the main point? One of the secrets to reading comp is loosely predicting your answers. Just like LR, these questions are written to trick you. We've already done this one, so everyone go ahead and answer question number 1. We've already predicted. And then once you have an answer, go ahead and put it in the chat. Does everybody have their own version of the passage? So I don't have to go back and forth. Okay, great.
Let's see.
Let's see, we have all. Okay, did everybody just follow Katie on this one? Or did everybody answer it on their own?
I actually chose A when I did it at home this morning.
Okay.
So I think that's too where I struggle with this main point because I'm so used to looking at 1 or 2 paragraphs in the LR questions that whenever I get a whole, reading comp, it's trying to figure out what exactly I'm focusing in on.
Absolutely. So main point questions on RC. At the end of the day, yes, it's what's the main point of the article. But if you're debating between 2 of them, ask yourself, why did the author write this, for 1? And 2, to add on to what you just said, Trish, I think Katie, we were talking about this yesterday. For those of us that struggle with main point questions, most of us either struggle with main point questions or referring to the passage, or we struggle with making inferences. I struggled with main point questions because I wanted to overanalyze everything and I couldn't focus in on like, oh, I'm really big on that. This is why the author wrote it. I would pick something too broad or way, way, way too specific. And a lot of people tell you that. And I struggled to understand what that meant until I started asking myself, why did the author write it? It's not about, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I've started doing the therefore, if I can narrow it down to 2 thoughts that I think it could be for conclusion, but still sometimes it doesn't work. So.
Right. And the main conclusion question is so important because for those of us that struggle with main conclusion questions, what we find ourselves doing is we do really well on the passages that we get the main conclusion right, and we bomb the passages that we don't because it gears it off.
Right.
So I was someone that I would get like -1 or 2 on most passages, and then 1 I would miss 5. And like, how does that happen? And it was because I missed the main point, and then I started answering the questions differently because I based it off of this new main point that wasn't the correct main point.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with A. Why? So main point, we're asking us this question. The biggest thing on reading comp is when in doubt, go mild. And what that means is for those that were in the necessary assumption class, so many of these answer choices are wrong because they're too strong. Biggest tip to RC, when in doubt, go mild. But let's start with A. I'm just gonna call him S. Though S's music is more widely appreciated today than when he was alive, it is still regarded by many as shrill and incoherent. Why is this one wrong? Or
Because
whenever you did this, did you say pass? I should say this. I always say love it, leave it, hate it. So if I hate it, I cross it off. If I love it, I put a dot next to it. And if I leave it, I just leave it blank. So I say love it, leave it, hate it, my first pass through. So I kind of know what my initial reaction was.
Would the still have made it wrong because it says still? Does that make it too strong?
No, this one I actually passed on the first time I read it. Yeah. If I'm being honest, I didn't love it though.
Oh, see, I hated it.
Okay, tell us.
I chose it.
You chose it? Sorry.
That's why.
I hated it because we didn't really talk about, there was no relevance to when he was alive versus when he was dead.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's strong enough for me to cross out.
He didn't talk about his appreciation of his music. There was no when he died, his music became more popular. That wasn't even discussed in the.
That's great reasoning. Yeah, I would cross it off based off of that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, B, because of his accomplishments as a composer, S deserves to be as highly regarded as Beethoven.
Too strong.
Too strong. Yes, this is an example of being too strong. The author might think this, but is that the point of is that why the author wrote it?
Mm-mm.
No. he could be respected. He might be in the same conversation as Beethoven, but to say he deserves to be as highly regarded is way too strong.
Okay, so just now when you asked us, you know, what we thought the point was about, and then you later said that, oh no, it's really saying that this guy is as good as Beethoven, right? Because I had picked C, but when you said that, I was like,
oh,
okay.
I misspoke. Okay, I get what you're saying when I narrowed it down.
Okay.
Yes, I said he's as good. Yes, that was my bad. I shouldn't have said it that loosely.
Okay.
Because of his accomplishments and he deserves to be as regarded as Beethoven.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't have said it so.
I think B is a good trap answer because it
Definitely.
did go into our predictions, but then after reading it, I was like, that's way too strong because we were saying as good as, we didn't say highly regarded, which I think they're two different.
I agree that they're different. And
Yeah.
even though I said that, which I will work on you on how I word things sometimes, because I would have read this and I would have been like, oh, I would have recognized this as a trap answer just because of the strength. I'd be like, oh, I bet they're trying to trick me.
Mm-hmm.
As highly regarded. All right, C. Who picked C? All right, Katie, what did you like about C?
Well, for my like main point predictor, I had guessed.
Another comment on B. Sorry, another comment on B. I think the part that this is missing, which C has, we'll talk about in a second, is
I'm gonna say that, yeah.
What was before? Like, what is the state? Like, his point is not just that he deserves to be as highly regarded. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. He does, but the whole point is like he's not regarded, he's not respected, he's not there, and this is why he should be. And so we're really missing that important piece in B as well, of it as it being too strong.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Katie, now C.
Yeah. So, for my main point predictor, I had said, well, first off, I called him Shu throughout the paragraph for my brain. And so I said, Shu's music has been criticized, but his advances in contribution respected. And so this was the one that I felt fit that the best. And so I chose it.
Awesome. Did anybody debate D or E?
Mm-mm.
Awesome. So some things I don't like about D is it says is most important for his invention, way too strong, way too narrow. And E, the point is not that Shu has not been accepted by Beethoven. It's that's true, but then we want to go on to why he should be respected. So I do think that B and C are the most attractive answers here, and especially because of my prediction that I said, I could see why B would be challenging. And when we narrow it down to two like this, one thing that we can ask ourselves is are both of these accurate? Let's say for the sake that we're going to say that B is accurate. Like, yeah, he is saying that. Which one is being used to support the other?
Yeah.
And whatever one is being used to support the other, the one that is being used to support the other, the one being supported is oftentimes our main point.
Mm-hmm.
So we use B to support C.
I've also heard like someone, I was in another class, and they said that like whatever the main point is should be touched on in every paragraph. So if like there's something that, you know, it could be true or must be true by the passage, but if it's not touched on in every single paragraph, then that means that the paragraphs are not used to support that point. So then it's not the main point.
I like that.
That's why D was
Like
easy.
that.
That's why D was easy to mark off, because it just talked about one small section.
Yeah.
Which I guess that would be why B is wrong then too, because
Mm-hmm.
okay, I like that. I'm gonna pay attention to it to make sure that it works, because I haven't seen. I mean, it makes sense that it would work,
Mm-hmm.
or at least like for something in the paragraph at least supports the main conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Okay. Okay, so 2. which one of the following could be said to be disturbing in a way that is most I can never say this word, analogous
I guess.
to the way that S's music is said to be disturbing in line 54? Who struggles with analogy questions? Or who takes a long time with them?
I skip them.
There we go. We have people skipping them. All right. So the trick to analogy questions is coming up with your own analogy. So if we go to line 54, and I have to read the question. I'm talking and thinking at the same time. Which of the following could be said to be disturbing? Could be said to be disturbing in a way that is most to the way that S's music is said to be disturbing in line 54. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to line 54. We're not going to read our answers. We're going to go to line 54. Oh, sorry, I have to find it.
You want me to read it for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So 54, some of his work remains disturbing, not because it is incoherent, shrill, and ear-splitting, but because it unflinchingly faces difficult truths.
Okay, so what are we saying that why are we saying it's disturbing?
Because it faces difficult truths that earlier in the paragraph he talks about, like emotional states and that are not recorded before.
Okay, so I'm thinking if I had to come up with my own analogy, not to get political, but this is the first one that came into my head. I'm thinking of that book, like Why It's Difficult for White People to Talk About Race. It's not that there's like a bunch of bad vocabulary in there that makes it uncomfortable, but it makes us face difficult truths. So that would be an analogy that I think would be similar to what we're saying here. Can anybody think of a different analogy that they could predict where it's like, oh, it's not the music, it's not it itself, but it's almost like the deeper meaning of it that hurts.
Right. It's not the really loud noises and the shrilling, disturbing ear-splitting type of music, but it has to do with the lyrics, maybe touch base on suicide or depression or something that people don't want to talk about.
Excellent.
So it was more about the lyrics being disturbing rather than the sound of the music being disturbing.
Yeah, like the meaning being disturbing. So that's what we're looking for. So let's go to this. Everyone go ahead and answer this question and put your answer in the chat. Okay. All right. So we have a couple different answers here. So let's think about this. What was our analogy? What did we focus on in our analogy?
Talking about the meaning of difficult truths.
The meaning of difficult truths, something we don't want to hear. So for example, Derek said B or E. If we're going to narrow this down, E, does it matter that it's unfamiliar to us? In our own analogy, did we say anything about it being unfamiliar? No.
You just stated
I guess
that is something you don't
yeah,
like.
we said something that makes us uncomfortable because it's almost familiar, right? It's almost like a slap in the face of, oh, this is, I don't want to talk, like what Gina said about suicide or depression. We don't want to talk about those things because awesome. I think that I could see where you're going to, where I said, like, oh, something that is unfamiliar might make us uncomfortable, but that's not the root of it. So if I was debating between B and E, that's where I would come to the difference. Trish, A, do you see the difference between A and B now? Do you see a comedian whose material relies heavily upon vulgar humor? Whenever we were talking about what?
Is it too strong?
No, is it the vulgar humor that makes people uncomfortable? Like, so in my book where I said, talk about race, it's not that it cusses a lot that makes us uncomfortable. Well, it's the meaning behind it that makes us uncomfortable.
Got it.
B, a comedian whose humor shines a light on aspects of human nature many people would prefer to ignore. Absolutely. Why? because
Ignore, we don't want to talk about the bad stuff that happens in our life.
is everybody see why B is the was this easy to pick out? Was it almost like stop? Like, is this too easy when we think about it?
Yeah.
Okay. The author begins with a quote from K, primarily in order to. Primarily is such a strong word on the LSAT. It means number one. It primarily, so many answer choices are wrong on reading comp because of the word primarily. But once again, we're going to go back to the quote, read it, and predict. Why do you think the author uses this? The reason we're predicting answers is these answer choices are written to confuse us. They're written for us to fail. So we have to trust our own, like our own gut almost when we read through them. So we don't get confused debating between a bunch. So can someone go ahead and read the quote for us?
I can for you. It's going back to the second paragraph. This, I'm going to read the whole paragraph. I mean, it's only like a couple of lines. So this remark aptly characterizes the reaction of many listeners to the music of Schoenberg. But this particular criticism comes from the pen of the dramatist August von K. Kutzenbud, written in 1806 about the overture to Beethoven's opera Fidelio. And so right there, that's the compare. He's starting to compare. So this remark is going back to the quote of the music being shrilling and incoherent.
To who?
Only to August. Only to August von K.
No, I think it says it's how many listeners thought of it.
Okay, comes from the pen.
I have a question.
Yeah, it's many listeners, but the pen, the August BK is the one who wrote it. But,
right. But I'll take your question one second, Angelica. What I was getting at was, like the reason that I thought that that we use this quote by this August is to show us how people, what people thought of his music. Many people thought of their music. Yes, Angelica?
Oh, no, I was just going to ask, is the quote that we're talking about here the first paragraph?
Yes. The quote's the first paragraph, but the second paragraph explains the quote to us. Why, like what the quote means.
Okay.
Do you see, because it says this remark?
Yeah, I just wasn't sure when Cora started reading, because like I wanted to go to the first paragraph, so I wasn't sure if I was off track.
Nope, you're perfect.
Me,
all right.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
I was going to say, when reading this question and then reading the quote from the start, where the author was trying to introduce this, it almost confuses the reader to feel like, okay, first, why is he talking about never was anything as incoherent, shrill, and chaotic and ear-splitting produced in music? And then he goes on to introduce Schoenberg, who is basically a no one, a nobody compared to Beethoven, and then going on to start to sing his praises and introduce him in that sense. And then later on in the passage, toward the end, where he says, he repeats basically the same phrase, some of his work remains disturbing, not because it's incoherent, shrill, and ear-splitting, but because it's unflinchingly faces difficult results. That, to me, right there, it's almost like one part when he first introduced it, it made you think, who is he talking about? And then
it's what they call that, a hook. The writer uses a hook.
Yeah, it confuses you at the start, and then he slowly introduces him and then builds him up and then says, wait a minute, here's the cliffhanger, here's what happened. And this is so
go ahead and answer. No, you're spot on, Derek. Everyone go ahead and answer question 3. Put your answer and then put a dash and put what your second choice would be. So we're going to go back to this. These are, a lot of people struggle with these types of questions because there's 2 steps to them. The first one is understanding what we're talking about, and the second is understanding why the author included it. So what the quote is which we said is what that description of that author is saying, how people interpreted their music. But the most important part of this, when it says in order to, why do we include this quote of them? It's not, what is the purpose of it? How does this help us get to our argument? And we include that to show you, I think, when we go into the contrast of what he really is or what he really represents. So for those of us that said B, where did we go? Where did you go wrong in that?
We don't know if it's accurate.
I would say it's not accurate. The author would say that what is said above in that quote is completely not what Schoenberg is.
Right.
He's so much more than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I think we got to the first, I think we answered that first question, but that second part, primarily the author included this why. Does the author think that that's an accurate account? No. I thought, okay, I'm on Derek's page where I thought D and E were the most tempting answers. But we had a lot of people pick C. So Cora, what did you like about C?
So like when I was reading it, I was like, okay, C. So because that, going back to that paragraph, he did a little bit of comparison to Beethoven. So then I was like, I'm going to hold C. And then I read D and I'm like, no, I like D. So C and D were my like back and forth, only because I was, on C, there were some comparisons of Beethoven.
I'm on the same boat with her. Like that's one of the reasons why I like C.
Is why, I'm sorry, Jaylene?
I'm on the same boat as her. That's one of the reasons why I was attracted to C. But I don't know about the uneven quality part, like that.
Yeah, and did you notice the Beethoven? You ever pick C? Did we include this to talk about Beethoven's quality?
Yeah.
Do you think that we included this quote to show that, hey, even Beethoven can be range in quality?
I mean, I thought the author was trying to say that, like even Beethoven, like such a well-known artist or musician, can. I mean, I don't know about the uneven quality part.
Oh,
either,
sorry.
But...
Okay, so let's go back to this text here. It says, this remark aptly characterizes the reaction of many listeners to the music of Arnold Schoenberg. But this particular criticism comes from the pen of the dramatist August, who's writing about Beethoven. So yes, we are right when we said that Beethoven, like we're using it to show like, hey, even Beethoven can do this. But are we using the Beethoven example to just show that even Beethoven can do it? Or are we using it to say, as our bottom line for Schoenberg?
For Schoenberg.
We're using it to Schoenberg. We're saying like, hey, even though Beethoven can do this, the main point of why he does not include this to prove to us that Beethoven has uneven quality, right? He uses it to say that because Beethoven might have uneven quality, Schoenberg can also be misrepresented as well. But I'm also looking at.
The quote doesn't apply to Beethoven though.
Well, it is. It's
about Beethoven.
It's about Beethoven. The quote, it says that that's where this question is hard. It's from the pen of the dramatist August, writing in 1806 about the overture to Beethoven's opera. So the quote is about Beethoven, but our author is saying that quote can also be used to describe the many listeners of Schu's music. But I agree with you, Derek, in the sense that we don't include it to talk about Beethoven. We include it to have some type of principle or some type of, what's the right word? Some type of comparison, so we can compare Schu to something. The thing that we're comparing is Schu. The thing that we care about is Schu. Beethoven just happens to be the guideline. And I don't think it suggests that, the quote itself does not suggest that Beethoven has uneven quality. From that alone, we would just think Beethoven sucked. Like, would you agree with
I
that?
thought that part was going back to that Beethoven also had like shrilling and ear-piercing music. So that
Right. But that alone would just mean that he's bad. Where does the quote say Beethoven is good? So where does the uneven quality come in? There is no uneven quality.
I don't like C anymore anyway. Like I've changed my
She's like, I'm not dating it. Okay. So why do we include this quote? It's to show us that music that is at first seen as alienated may not seem alienating later. So something at first here, you're like, oh, that, blah, but then when you start listening to it, it's like, oh, this is awesome.
Yes.
Well, why the word alienating? Like alienating means
Confuse you.
Sorry?
To confuse you.
Yeah, that's
But
why I
how-
didn't like it. I didn't like the alienating. I was like, ugh.
Like, how is that relevant?
So, okay, so to translate this, it's saying to show that music that might first be not alienating, be a turnoff, or be like you like don't like, you might like more later.
It's an interesting use of the word alienating.
Oh, I guarantee so many people miss it. This is a harder passage, for sure, because there's so, like, you have to really understand what's happening, and the word choices are awful. All right, so everyone, go ahead on your own, answer 4, 5, and 6 on your own, and really work on making predictions before. I'm going to see if all these are prediction kinds. Okay, I'm going to tell you how to predict before you do it. So on question 4, how I predict these answers is I just loosely tell myself, what does Beethoven and S have in common? I don't say them all. I just kind of try to remember I don't go back to the passage, just from in my head, what do I remember? And I think about that so I can quickly cross them off. For 5, I would ask myself, what do I know S really likes about music? And for 6, I would ask myself, what is the relationship between the 3 styles before I even read the answer choices? And let's go ahead and take like 4 minutes to answer these.
That was my prediction.
Yeah, no. And then, okay, and then what answer choice did you say?
D.
How easy was that after that prediction?
It was easy.
Excellent. No, absolutely. But the depiction of emotional states had never been captured in music before. That's not the wording I would use. And if I didn't predict an answer, I don't think D would stick out to me as much, because it's worded so fancy that I don't talk like that. So I might be afraid to pick it.
It was a toss-up between C and D for me because of the 12th tone that he initially talked about, and then went to the emotional states at the end.
All right, so how do we determine which one is the most important?
I went back to the passage, and when he talked about the emotional states, he mentioned that that's what made him essential.
Yes, he uses the word, what makes S's music essential is that he precisely delineated, I don't know the word, recognizable and sometimes disquieting emotional states that music has not recorded before. It literally tells us that that's what's essential. But Derek, if you narrow it down to 2, and you go back and just have to check those two, look how much time you save from not having to check all of them. All right. I thought this was the hardest question out of all of them. And so before I got there, I asked myself, what was the relationship between the three styles of music? Before I read this, this one I had to go back for because I couldn't remember. And I went back and read it, and it says, the one from the, I didn't see much of a connection between the first and the second, to be honest. But the one thing that I really pointed out was it said that his view, it was the next inevitable step. So I was just like, oh, so he kind of starts off broader and just gets more specific, was what my preface was. I didn't know at all what these answer choices were what direction they were going to go. And now that I'm trying to share my preface while knowing what the answer choices say. But when I was looking at it, I was like, it's almost like he was a broad genre. It just got more specific as he advanced. Go ahead and put your answer choices for this one in the chat.
Yeah, I thought this one was fairly easy, although I might have gotten it wrong. So I don't want to say that until I know for sure what the answer is.
All right, you're like, okay, so let's look at, we have a lot of people saying C. And I read this one, and I read the first one. Each successive style represents a natural progression from the previous one. And I was like, I don't know. I'm like, that's weird. And then I read the second one. Each successive style represents an inexplicable departure from the previous one. I immediately crossed B out because of that one. The only line I really remembered was, it was was it undeniable? It was an inevitable step towards the third one.
Right.
Between 2 and 3, it was inevitable. Like, it had to happen. So I crossed B off.
Oh.
And C, I crossed off for the same reason, because it's saying the third style was inexplicable departure from the second. And I think the second to the third was really smooth.
Yeah, that's not how I read it.
Yeah. So can I say what I thought about?
Yeah.
So that paragraph where he says, finally, he developed the 12-tone technique. So the 12-tone technique was the third step. And he says that it was a means of bringing a new system of order to the non-tonal, which was the second step. So I felt like it was making it seem like he was not abandoning, but he was like adding the order that he took away.
I thought he was making a distinction between the second and third as well. Like, that's why I picked C. Is I read it differently than you read it, Nicole. Like, I read it like Amy did, where the third, the 12 tone, was standing out from the first and the second.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say something on this one?
No.
Go ahead, Derek. Show us your wisdom.
Okay, if you read the passage, lines 31 through 37, I think, Schoenberg later pushed through these unstable harmonies until they no longer had tonal basis. It's almost like he progressed from one stage and went on to the next and onto the next until he became, until the music became splitting and whatnot. To me, that was the what A symbolizes. Each successive style represents a natural progression from the previous one. And that's how I read it.
Yeah.
But C says that too. C says that went from 1 to 2 was a natural progression, but then 3 was the departure.
but then you're limiting the style to one specific style. But he went from a natural progression from one to the other without saying a certain stage of it.
So my pre-phrase for this was like first style, harmony, second style, disordered harmony, third style, second style was chaotic disordered harmony, and then third style was organized chaotic disordered harmonies. So that kind of helped me get to A, but I was stuck with D for a while. I think just because the last three answers look so similar that I was thrown off, like, oh, they're trying to trick you, so it has to be one of like these formats. And so it made me doubt A, but I couldn't fit my like pre-phrase into one of those three, so I chose A. Because I felt like each one maintained, transformed, and also he, in the paragraph, said he's so obsessed with like furthering the future and the progress of music. So that's what made me choose A as opposed, but C, D, and E were just hard because like the phrasing and the formatting was so rough and they're so similar. It made you think it had to be one of those three.
I 100%, your explanation was spot on. When I asked myself, what is because I knew a change happened and I was like, but was he departing? And the only thing I could think about was like when Taylor Swift went from country to pop. Like that was an inexplicable departure, right? Like, but then I thought about it real quickly. I was like, wait, but she did kind of have that album in between where she was in between. And I was like, so really, did she do that? And like what would be an inexplicable departure? I think that would be going from one genre completely to a different. And that never happened. Where I couldn't, so how I really got to the answer was I couldn't, if I had to say that, where was it at? The second style represents a natural progression from the first. And I felt like if I had to choose between C, D, and E, then there couldn't even be a change because I couldn't see the change in the text either.
Right.
Wait, repeat that. Say that one more time.
When I was looking at C, D, and E, for me to accept one of these answer choices, I feel like I had to also accept a different part of another one that I couldn't see. Even though C, D, and E, I wanted to pick one of them. Naturally, I did, but I couldn't, like kind of what Katie said, I couldn't make one fit. So I'm like, well, maybe there just isn't a change. And that's how I ended up going with A. Because really, which one do you think is the inexplicable change? If you had to say one, what's the inexplicable change?
I thought the third one, but I guess
I screwed up.
I thought, okay, I was the opposite. I thought if there was one, it would have had between 1 and.
I would have guessed 1 and 2 would have been the inexplicable change because 3 organized the second.
Yes, I agree. And it says it's the inevitable step that he had to take. So I crossed off from that. E, B, C, I crossed off B, C, and E, and then I decided between A and D. Can we see why it's a natural progression? I think the biggest question here is when it says inexplicable departure. Can everyone hear how strong that is?
Yeah, I was about to say that.
And ask yourself, was this an inexplicable departure truly? Does he divorce everything he knows?
He was building.
He was building.
He built, yeah.
Yeah, because everything was building on from the one previous.
It was changing, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
C and D actually proves A. Like you can't have C and D if A is not true because it was a progression in each one of those steps.
Yeah.
Music.
I don't like this question. I'm just gonna.
No, this is a very, whenever Gina said it was easy, I was like, this is a really hard question.
Well, like I said, I misread it. I'll throw myself under the bus. I'll show my cockiness and then eat my humble pie.
Like, I thought that's what they say though. Sometimes when people think the test was too easy, they're like, it was just too easy because people they had such a baseline level of knowledge, they didn't realize how tricky the questions really were.
Well, because you have to be very careful, because when I read it, when you asked it to do predictions, I just predicted that there was an even flow between the first style and the second style, and then all of a sudden he switched it up on the third with a 12-tone bass, versus he wasn't dealing with just I don't know what it went in. Anyway, that's in my mind when I read it the first time, that's how I was reading it, is that he went from his first style, which then led to his second style, and then all of a sudden his third style, he took a left instead of a right. And
The big one, I think
not
that
what happened.
it's just the word inevitable. Like that word is what.
Yeah.
It had to happen.
And I didn't pay attention to that word.
Okay.
I was probably thinking too much about the food that Derek was showing us last night in our study group. So I kind of backtracked.